Welcome to the Productivity Pulse. This is episode number 4, and as ever, Sue and James are back with me, and we have a very special guest today, star of the recently published mini-series with Simon Woodfield around MTM, Ed Thompson. Hi Ed, how you doing?
Hi Simon, nice to be on another podcast. Yeah, I'm looking forward to get my IMDb page all set up as a rising podcast star.
And Rotten Tomatoes, maybe.
Yeah, that's the one.
You never know. Hi Sue, hi James, welcome back.
Hi.
Hello. I need to get Ed's agent. He's way ahead of me in his publication.
I know, it's just got me thinking. So you're going to lead this one, James. I'm going to take a back seat today, and I'll be back at the end. So Productivity Pulse, episode 4. Over to you, James Bell.
Yeah, and I mean, Ed, you're here because we're specifically going to talk about QSR because it's kind of an interesting sector that we've been doing a lot of work in, and we think there's some interesting lessons. I mean, Sue, from your point of view, kind of how do you introduce the QSR sector, and why do you think it's worthy of talking about?
Well, QSR, first of all, quick serve restaurant. So it's everywhere where they do takeaways. It's your grab lunch type outlets. So it's been really a highly innovative sector. It's been growing, and partly it's growing because there's new channels, new delivery channels. So whether it's delivery, Uber Eats, all the other things, as well as sometimes people having their own delivery channels as well. So as well as people coming into the restaurant to either order food and take it away, then they might have pre-ordered on an app. There'll be, delivery drivers and riders coming in to pick up food. So that's kind of quite an innovation in terms of how they get their product to their actual end users, the people that eat the product. And then there's been a lot of innovation behind the scenes. And a lot of this has been driven by the fact that the same challenges that a lot of other businesses are facing are affecting QSR, quick serve restaurants as well. So, people are more expensive through the various either inflation, more than inflation pay rises that's been happening because the typically sort of minimum wage or thereabouts environments. There's also been the higher tax, the national insurance rates that's applying to the employers as well. And there's also been inflation costs in terms of the raw ingredients and the products that they're using as well. So this is a sector that's had all those challenges that everywhere else is happening and has found some really interesting ways to deal with it. And nobody's been closer to it than really Ed in terms of getting down into the nitty-gritty of what they've been doing.
That's great. And, this is a sector that's relatively price sensitive. I mean, would the QSR restaurants just be able to raise their prices, or is that going to be an issue, do you think?
I think there has been inflation in food prices generally. However, with everything, I think people hit a barrier of how much they pay for their lunch or they pay for their foods that they're grabbing and going. So yeah, there's a price ceiling, and there will have been price innovation behind the scenes. I guess what we'll see more is what's the operational impact of what the business is doing to manage along those costs.
Brilliant, thank you, Sue. And in respect of that, Ed, I mean, Sue talked about delivery and drivers being in the store and so on, customers getting their food in different ways. Is that something you've seen on the projects you've been involved in?
Definitely, and the more recent ones. So anything from 2020 onwards is where you've seen the real growth of delivery channels and the diversification of it as well. So it's not just a singular channel anymore. There's 3 main ones in the UK that I can think of. There's similar abroad. I know Spain is quite heavy in terms of the sales volume they drive through delivery drivers and delivery orders. And it does put a entirely different challenge on a restaurant that's not necessarily laid out to deal with a lot of drivers turning up in a small amount of time in terms of the window that they're all picking up their order and then leaving again. The footprints of the restaurants and the layouts haven't changed much. They are primarily there for you to go up to a counter, place your order, collect it quickly, and either leave the restaurant or go and sit down and eat it. And the delivery drivers do almost a tiny amount of that journey, but there's a lot more of them and it's a lot more frequent, and you don't want to have them waiting in that space that's customer space, if you like, because it just creates a big backlog in that area and actually limits the space that they're able to use to then serve customers that are sitting down in that restaurant and wanting a bit of a different experience versus the drivers. So that's been one of the challenges we've seen, like I say, last couple of years, but definitely from 2020.
Yeah, and from a customer experience point of view, I can think of many different quick serve restaurants where I've been present and delivery drivers have walked straight past me to find food when I've been waiting in a queue, or there's been a big gang of them around a certain part of the restaurant. It's been difficult to get in or an unpleasant experience. So it's kind of from, I think a lot of listeners will sympathize with that experience and have had similar. But from a productivity point of view, is it just about trying to get those drivers out of the space where the customers are trying to queue and eat, or is there something else that these organisations are doing to try and make that less of an issue?
That's been the sort of main approach, is to almost separate that channel out, and it's got two benefits. So that number one benefit is on the customer's experience side, where it separates them out from the front of house area that customers use and put them into a delivery drivers only area, so that they've got a clear channel, they know where to go, they know where to pick the food up from, and it's not impacting any other journeys that are going on within the restaurant. But it's also had a secondary benefit of, if your layout's correct back of house, you can create a bit more space for customer orders and create less confusion as well. Sort of, again, 2020 was the prime example where you go into a QSR restaurant and there might be 10, 15, 20 orders, all pre-prepared, all left on the back counter, waiting for drivers to come and pick them up. Now, that's one confusion if you're a colleague, because you've got to look through and find the right order and match it up to the number that the drivers are showing you. So there's a chance that you get meals mixed up there between drivers. But it also decreases the quality of the food the customer will be receiving. If you're ordering from a restaurant, it's been sitting on a worktop for 5 minutes, it's already colder than it would be if the driver was able to just come in, pick it up and take it, and then it's got the journey from restaurant to house or workplace that driver's going to make, where the quality goes down again. And if you look on Google and go on Maps and look at the reviews, a lot of the times the negative reviews are around delivery orders being placed and arriving either late or cool. And it's not necessarily to do with the restaurant directly, but it's obviously having an impact on them having to deal with the negative reviews. So they take it out, put it in a separate section where you can put a hot hold unit in. You can keep the quality of the food better for longer. You can separate out where the drivers are picking it up from, and you've got more space than back of house to keep your orders that are going straight out to a customer that's coming to the restaurant to eat or collect it. So it's that siloing out the channel has been a big piece of work for a lot of QSR restaurants.
And then the tech has enabled that around kind of some hot holds and lockers and that type of thing. It's kind of a fascinating mix of process and technology and people that kind of enables that change.
Yeah. And there's been, in examples, we've seen the low-tech solutions where it is you still go through an employee to hand out the order, works really well. But we have seen examples where they're almost trialing the locker styles where it's almost contactless, and the driver comes in, scans their phone to get the order number, and the locker opens automatically. So there's definitely different solutions out there, with some being more technologically advanced than others, but it's all with the sort of same goal in mind.
Yeah, and listen, another area where technology has changed the experience in my experience is I don't ever talk to a person anymore when I'm ordering in a QSR restaurant. I'm always just using a self-serve kiosk. Are they common now, or is that just kind of peculiar to the few restaurants that I go to?
No, they're very common. part of it is sprung from that labour cost and the increase of needing somebody on that counter for the entire trading period is expensive, especially if going to be sort of underutilised for periods of the day where it's quieter. But the menus are also more complex than they used to be, and the number of different combinations of food and different deals you can get is quite a lot for somebody on a till to translate and get across to somebody who's potentially placing the order. What you'll notice when you're using the kiosk quick serves is that you will always get something upsold to you. Whether you know about it at the time or not, there will always be a pop-up that says, do you want to make it a meal? Do you want a drink? Do you want fries with that? And it will build that sort of experience up to make sure the customers are always being offered pretty much everything available to try and maximise that transaction value, which historically is something that if you had colleagues on the till, that would be something that they will be managed really closely on to make sure that upselling is happening throughout the customer journey. The kiosks allow for businesses to do that without requiring somebody on the till 24/7 to be really skilled and highly knowledgeable about the menu and what can be offered to the customers.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about the value of that, but I guess you can ensure every customer is upsold with something if you're doing it through a kiosk.
Yeah. It gets that almost upsell percentage to as close as to 100% as you're going to be able to get. And I guess if there's a bit of a logic of everyone's walking in there with a set almost budget in mind, then it's how do you optimize and get that almost biggest bang for the customer's buck almost feeling for them.
Yeah, and if some of these restaurant chains will have loyalty schemes, I guess, and the offers can then be tailored. I mean, I heard there was a story 10 years ago that restaurants in Japan or China would use facial recognition to try and guess what type of person you were and make specific offers to you. Have we seen any evidence of offer personalisation through kiosks? Is that something they can do through loyalty schemes?
There's certainly one chain in the UK that uses loyalty schemes to sort of personalise and tailor things. It's not as common in QSR as it is with, say, coffee chains. We studied one in Europe recently where they're bigger into the loyalty schemes, and that's more around building points, and for every X number of points or visits you get, then you get a product for free. That was the same chain over there where they had a scheme in place that if you were a member of the loyalty scheme, if your food was delayed by up to say 2 minutes, your next visit there would be you'd get a free item of food as well. So they were almost going at it with two different angles in that one to make sure that the customer's experience was better as well, just almost all the time that you're visiting the location, if you've got a loyalty card versus if you hadn't.
It's great. I find it fascinating. Sue, I wanted to bring you in here really quickly if I can, because I know in kind of family dining restaurants, we've had clients in the past who've struggled with the notion of maybe putting payment terminals on the tables or using tech for orders because they worry about the personal touch and the lack of upsell. But I think you've told a story before that that's not necessarily true. Actually, the technology can help drive upsell and drive better experiences. I wonder if you want to kind of just generalize with that before we move on to the next section.
Yes, when screens were first introduced into the UK, I remember one of the businesses that introduced them talking about the fact that actually their average sale value had gone up, partly because people have a bit longer to decide. So, if there's a big queue and you have to give your order quickly, if you're slightly dithering, you'll probably, not order that extra, whatever it is, whether it's the pudding or the fancy milkshake or whatever it is. Whereas actually when people have got longer to look at the screen, they've got longer to discuss those for the kids to talk them into it or whatever it is. So it's really interesting to see how it works. And if you look, even Marks and Spencer's, where their cafes have got typically an older demographic than you might see in some other QSR type settings, they've got screens in there now. So, there's lots of silver surfers using the kiosks. So So it really is widespread.
And as people get more used to it in more places, then it will become kind of more accepted and more used. It's really, really interesting to see this sector kind of at the forefront of that and driving some real change. And it's not just in terms of tech, is it, Ed? There's, when we think about the people we've worked with in the last couple of years in the QSR sector, trying to drive more customer value out of their resource, we've seen all types of things, haven't we, around kind of layout changes and task simplification. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so if we start with layout, there's been a bit of again, it's come about from the cost of labour and the cost of ingredients, is to make sure that they're maximising throughput. So if you can make more of something in the same amount of time and become more efficient, then you're going to generate more sales from that period of time that you've got. And it's about, in this sector especially, it's about seconds and fractions of seconds and making processes as simple as possible to be able to drive in that sort of activity. So like if you take burger making as an example, it's very rare that it takes these restaurants anything over a minute to actually make and assemble a burger from start to finish. So when you're starting to look at ways that you can improve that area's sort of layout to be able to enable you to increase your throughput, you are moving things centimetres close to people, or you're increasing capacities of units to make sure they hold more products and don't need to be replenished as often, or you're upgrading the technology that's already existing. So things like bread toasters, we've seen companies where they've trialled the toasters, almost turning them up so they toast the bread quicker. But even things like what happens if you drop the crown of a burger and the base of a burger bun into two different slots, and then when it comes out the bottom, you've not got to look and see which one's which and flip them the right way around. It's already done for you. You just almost grab them and go and build on that from the next stage. So there's loads of work that places are doing to, like I say, make 10, 15 seconds gain in some instances, but you multiply that by the amount of burgers a chain can make in a day, and it becomes a big one, either cost saving, or two, you increase the amount of customers that you can serve in that window of time.
That's great. And every business, whether they're making burgers or selling widgets or whatever it might be, if there's something that happens thousands of times a day in their locations, then finding a slightly quicker way to do it yields huge benefits for them.
Yeah.
Now,
go on.
No, well, I mean, because I was going to ask, because I know that we are seeing brands come to us and ask us to measure innovations they've come up with, aren't they? They're not just rolling them out and hoping for the best. I think, is that another area where people can learn from QSR in terms of testing and learning?
Yeah, I'd say so. So they're another sector that is really good at launching a trial of something in a set number of locations, and then we can go and measure those new processes and see what difference it makes to that process, see if it's increased or decreased productivity. But we can also see how it interacts with different areas of the restaurant as well. So there's some examples where restaurant chains have automated a process, but they've not automated the entire process, just a set proportion of it. But all it basically drove in was people standing and watching a machine do what they would have ordinarily been doing, because they needed to wait for the machine for them to do the next part of the task. So there was no real saving in that instance. So it was a good proof of concept to say, well, as it is, it's not working, but actually you change a couple of things around, you make it do more of the process, and it will start to have an impact. Similarly, you've seen examples in sort of a couple of projects we've done recently where they've wanted to know the impact of, if you make a special product for a limited amount of time, what impact does that have on the restaurant and the operations? And it can look quite minimal when you're introducing that, because it's just a new a type of burger, but then it actually increases the amount of toppings that you've got to hold in an area that's already tight. So people are walking more between like a burger and the topping that they're wanting. And just little things like that will have knock-on impacts throughout the entire restaurant. So if you've ever been and used the drive-through lanes, if you order one of those special products, they're less likely to have them ready and waiting and available for you. So then you're more likely to end up getting parked in a space as a customer. But if you get parked in a space, often a colleague then has to come out of the restaurant, walk to the car and hand an item or your order over to you, which is a lot longer than if things are just ready and available to hand out at the drive-through window. So it was interesting to show that limited time offer is a small change, but actually has almost a butterfly effect throughout the entire restaurant, where it was driving more people to end up being parked into bays and then a colleague to go out of the restaurant and serve them rather than just passing things through windows.
Yeah, and those are the types of costs that are often hidden from the people who come up with the good ideas of the limited time offer products or the changes. So really interesting to see it in practice. Now, I mean, you've talked about utilization a couple of times, and I'd like to ask another question about that to you and then to Sue. But before I move on, is there anything else that you wanted to flag up about what you've seen in QSR that you think the listener would be interested in?
I think it's just a really interesting sector, and like we've touched on, it is that innovation piece that it can be. They're normally at the forefront of anything exciting and shiny in terms of the trials, because there is that attitude of, well, if you don't, there's nothing to lose necessarily by trialing it in a couple of locations, but there can be everything to gain from it if you can completely remove a process that somebody's doing and make a big saving on labour for almost a capex that you can pay off over the course of a couple of years. So I think, there's a lot to learn from the sector in terms of that trialing and just going for things, trialing it, and then learning the lessons from it. And at least then, rather than just thinking about things and it being written off before it is even tried in some instances.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And, you mentioned this earlier yourself when you were talking about automation. So if you're finding time that you can save in your operation, you need to find a certain amount of time before you can reduce your staffing workload, because if you're just freeing up small chunks of time, you still need somebody there to work around those chunks of time. And, you can't ask people to just come in for 1 or 2 hour shifts. So how have you seen that impacting QSR? And then, Sue, I'd ask you to come in and talk about that more generally, if that's okay. So Ed, how have you seen it impacting QSR?
We've seen it in a couple of different ways. So one, it's introduced an almost unavoidable wait in some instances and in some processes where they've not removed enough of a process to completely eliminate the work that goes on with it. So that instance of somebody watching a machine so they can do the next task, that's a classic example of that. But we've also seen restaurants start to look at the time that's being created and look at what's being completed when the restaurant's really busy in terms of tasks, and start to say, or start to question at least, what tasks do we complete during our busiest period of time that we can move out of that and move into the quieter times and ensure people are occupied when they're in the restaurant. So it's things as simple as part of making a portion of fries is going to be opening a packet up. Now, during peak, you're constantly opening up packets if you're not careful. So one restaurant we saw pre-opened a load of packets so that they had a box ready to go where you just picked a packet up and put fries into. And they took that piece of workload that's to do with assembling a portion of fries and just took it out of peak completely. Ensured people were occupied when otherwise they'd be going around and filling the time with cleaning worktops, let's say.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. And if you've got good forecasting for the day ahead, then you can minimize waste for that as well. So I guess that's another area where tech comes together with processor. Sue, I mean, I know we've talked about this on previous episodes. How do brands, gear up to serve lots of customers at peak, but deal with the fact that they don't want people there serving when it's not peak? I mean, is there anything else you would like to say on that at this point in relation to QSR or its applicability elsewhere?
It is the big challenge for people. And as we've talked about before, we're seeing some evidence that those peaks, if anything, people are being at times when they've pulled back on spend and they've pulled back hours, there's a real risk that if you don't manage to resource your peaks correctly, then what you do is you sort of stifle your capacity. And QSRs have had this interesting challenge where there are natural peaks when people tend to eat at meal times, which is stating the obvious. By adding in sort of the other delivery channels, they've actually made their peaks even peakier. So it has forced them to really think, well, how do we make the most of, get the throughput as a maximum when it's busy? And for years, QSR restaurants have been some of the best places at managing their resource so that they know that at a certain level of throughput, one person can be looking after the fries and building a burger at the same time. And actually, once you hit a certain point, you really need to have two separate people on. So they've become very adept at knowing how many colleagues they need based on the throughput at that particular time. So that combination of using their colleagues really smartly, trying to take workload out all the time, has meant that they are much better able than a lot of other businesses and sectors are in terms of managing those peaks, which I say has been a challenge because those peaks have just got peakier. So been some really clever stuff happening.
That's fascinating. Thank you both. Before I throw back to Simon, Sue, is there anything else that you would like to chat about in relation to QSR? What have I not asked you about that I should have done?
Nothing that I can think of. It just amazes me that there's usually lots of them on every high street and we kind of all walk past them, but probably we don't really think about kind of some of the amazing stuff that does happen within these businesses.
Yeah, I certainly don't. Ed, how about you? And we don't speak as often as I speak with Sue on these podcasts. Is there anything else that I've not asked you that you'd like to chat about?
Nothing really. I just, without sounding like a marketing man or making people sort of eat unhealthily, it is worthwhile going into these restaurants and just taking a moment to appreciate what's happening to get that food with you so quickly, because it's amazing really that you can make these products so quickly and get them out to customers, and the amount of innovation that goes into that item of food that you're eating it's extraordinary really when you think about it.
Amazing, thank you. And that's why you need an IMDb page and I don't. There you go. Thank you both. That was fascinating. I could talk all day, but I'll hand back to Simon to talk about anything else that's coming up.
Thank you, James and Sue. So the headline for this podcast is Ed encourages you to visit QSRs. You didn't say eating them, I noticed, Ed, just visit. So a couple of things just to remind you about. We will be at the Retail Technology Show the 22nd and 23rd of April at the Excel in London, along with lots of other fabulous companies for you to come and say hello and look at. We've got the VIP party in partnership with Sold by AI on the 22nd, so that's the first evening of that event. I will put the registration link in the show notes if you've not registered. And just looking a bit further ahead, our 11th Productivity Forum takes place in September in Birmingham. Again, there's a link on the website if you want to register and take part in the day. Places are filling up quick. We've got more people registered than last year, so planning to be a great event with our partner lounge, again, bigger than last year. So we won't talk too much about that. We'll keep you in suspense for the day. But once again, thanks, Ed, for joining us as a special guest. Thanks, Sue and James. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Simon. See you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Simon.